Although their policy will hurt American families, until that pain becomes impossible to ignore, I do not believe they will change direction. So the road to that point may indeed be long.
That was Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney doing what a lot of world leaders are doing today, trying to predict the future of President Trump's tariff regime and the implications thereof and how long it's going to last. For perspective on this and how it's affecting, at least today and perhaps in the next couple of days, the global economy, I want to bring in the global economics reporter for Bloomberg, Enda Curran. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Major.
So how would you summarize today's global economic reaction to the Trump tariffs?
I think people are talking about a shock that reminds them of maybe early in the pandemic. It's that kind of systematic fallout. You have economists now downgrading their forecasts for the US economy and downgrading their growth forecast for the global economy. And take China, for example. It's especially vulnerable to this trade war with the US. Some estimates there that up to 80% of Chinese exports could be impacted by these new tariffs. So certainly a shock on growth and trade around the world.
And one of the things that struck me today, listening to the analysts looking at the market reaction, was there had been an expectation that the markets had priced in the tariffs, but they were larger and more sweeping than the markets expected. That's why there was a downturn today. And that was not just in the US-based markets, global ones as well.
That's right. I think, as people are saying, it wasn't just a worst-case scenario, probably worse than the worst-case scenario. That's the way a lot of people are framing it today, the breadth and the scope of those tariffs. And not just on, key trading rivals, say China, for example, being the obvious one, but across the scope of economic allies, across some of the key hubs, trading hubs of Asia, Vietnam being an obvious one, for example. So there's a feeling now that, A, this is going to mean more expensive goods in the near term, no matter what. B, companies are going to have to reshuffle and move around their supply lines. That's going to be very expensive with knock-on impacts on investment and jobs.
And when the president says, as I quoted him directly a few moments ago on Air Force One, the operation is over, but also tariffs give us great power to negotiate. It creates this uncertainty. Well, what is it? Are these the rates? Or is there a negotiated way to try to peel them back somehow?
Well, we're certainly getting hints of an aggressive response from trading partners already before we get to negotiations. So France and Germany, officials there talking today about pulling whatever levers they can to retaliate against these US tariffs. French President Macron saying French companies should stop investing in the US for the moment. And of course, China overnight saying that they're looking at ways to retaliate and will do so as well. Now, maybe we do get to this negotiation point, but right here, right now, we feel like we're at the ugly end of this trade war.
And what investors are worrying about is everything sort of locking up.
Oh, very much so.
Stalling.
Companies not making decisions to expand, companies putting hiring on hold. We'll get employment data for the US tomorrow that might start to give us some hints if it is having an impact. And of course, investors pulling their money out of America and going into the dollar today, for example, had a 1.5% fall. Instead, the euro and the yen rallying as a result. Question marks over dollar safe haven status. So negative response. To be clear, the administration says it will generate jobs, it will bring manufacturing back to the US, near-term pain, long-term gain. But what I'm just telling you today is that the initial reaction is fairly downbeat.
And I'd like your perspective on how the world looks at the U.S. economy, because I looked at these statistics today, they jumped out at me. The United States accounts for 5% of global population, 25% of global GDP. We're a colossus, and everyone around the world knows that. And if we start throwing our elbows around, I have to think that they're going to be protective of themselves and their own economy, not just because it's angering them, but because they feel like they must.
Yeah, that's the expectation now, that when the US puts up this kind of a trading wall, the biggest sweep of tariffs in a century, we haven't seen this before, now other governments are going to respond. They're going to put up their own tariffs and put up their own protective measures to protect their own economies and their own goods against the US. And that's the danger, that's what people are warning about, that we get into this spiral now of a tit-for-tat retaliatory trade war that obviously hurts global growth. Lots of warnings today. JP Morgan tonight coming out with a figure of about 60% chance now of a global recession. References back to the Smoot-Hawley era and the Great Depression. You might say some of those cases are maybe extreme. We don't know yet. It's still early in this process, but the point is there are lots of warning signs about where this could be going.
Enda Curran with Bloomberg. So good to have you here. I appreciate it very much.